Kidding. Good afternoon. It is 4:35 on May 15th. I hereby call to order the Budget Committee of the Memphis City Council. Ms. Owens, would you please call the roll?
Councilwoman Johnson. Councilman Warren. Present. Chair Carlisle.
Present. Chair observes a quorum. Welcome back, everyone. Beautifully hot week in Memphis. Since we're talking finance, probably going to have to dig into the city's war chest down at Tom Lee Park this weekend. Yikes. Got a little wet down there. Colleagues, we have Chief Ford, who's graciously agreed to do a couple things that we haven't done in the past, which is spend a little bit of budget time talking about some of the debt service funds and special revenue funds, and then in addition to her department, and then dive into IT, which I know we're all experts at. So let's do it. Thank you for also moving your schedule around, for being here. All right, Chief Ford, the floor is yours whenever you are ready.
Good afternoon, council members. Shirley Ford, Chief Financial Officer, 125 North Main, Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you this afternoon. I'll try to make this brief. I know nobody wants to hear a whole lot, but I just kind of want to give an overview of who we really are and what we do. So this is the organization chart for the finance division. You can see it has quite a few little arms, and I'm going to talk about a few of them just quickly so you have an idea as we move through legal levels into the budget that you know where we are. In the financial management, that includes our governmental and operational accounting, which, as you know, we have the general fund and about 37 other funds, 17 general fund divisions. Operational and enterprise funds, which includes our sewer and stormwater, the healthcare, unemployment, and the fleet are our internal service funds. I have 7 people in AP. As you can imagine, we have thousands of transactions that run through that service center. In payroll, I have 7 people, and that is approximately 192,400 transactions for our active employees, and for our retirees, approximately 141,600 for a total of 334,000 transactions that happens every fiscal year for us. In records, we have 5 people. That includes Valerie Snipes, as you know, whom we call Madam Comptroller. She has been delegated the responsibility of maintaining the minutes for all of the council meetings, as well as the record keeper of all resolutions and ordinances, and all file retentions, even those outside of the council. And then in grants, which you will hear from later today, our accounting and compliance. As you know, we have over $200 million on our single audit, plus our various other transactions that go through the miscellaneous grants account. In our city treasurer, that is where we have the collection and reporting of the city revenues, the preparation and distribution of tax billings, tax assistance, and our pilots. In the Office of Financial and Strategic Planning, that is our strategic goals development and monitors of CIP and any and all CIP resolutions. The Office of Comprehensive Planning, which is John Zena, who is also in the audience here with us today, as well as 14 people in the Equal Business Opportunity and Development Program, or what we call OBDC. That is, the development and execution of small business and MWBE contractors. In procurement, we have 13 people who, are rock, paper, scissors, everything from concrete down to office supplies, procurement, contracting, bids, and auctions. In the budget office, we have a budget staff of 6, is also responsible for the development and monitoring of all budgets, the state and the GFOA reporting, and then vets all resolutions that come through for your review and approval. In debt management, there are actually 2 separate pieces of that. One is the actual debt, which is, our issuance of bonds, notes, leases, the timely payment of our debt and disclosure obligations, also responsible for bond rating and market reviews. And then we have our 2 people in our investment committee that handles all of our pension investments, our cash flows, and internal investments. And then administration, which includes me and 3 other people. We are the coordinators of all the financial functions for the city of Memphis. So our priorities that are addressed by this budget is to continue to advance a culture of excellence in government by providing fiscal and financial stewardship for the benefit of our city operations, our citizens, and our communities. The funding will provide the resources to continue our mission of providing this type of leadership and service and timely financial information. The non-personnel costs are budgeted to provide the appropriate level of resources for those services required. And our finance division, as I indicated, also includes the Office of Planning and Development, and this budget contains sufficient funding to meet the Shelby County required funding. So I'll move into our expenditures bridge for the FY24 request. As you can see, year over year, our additional request is approximately $359,570. Most of that is specific to personnel services, and most of that is directly related to the proposed increases that are in the mayor's budget. Down in grants and subsidies, I would note that there are typically only two. One is the grant for the planning and development that I alluded to earlier, and the other is for the tax receivable sale redemption. And our program comparative spending, this is, again, year over year by the legal levels. As you can see, the largest increase is in the finance administration, and that's because all the potential raises are parked in one service center, as we have done with other divisions. So it really kind of sticks out there, but that's where that is. For our changes in year over year in expenditures, as you can see in personnel, the potential raises account for $182,616 of that change. The other changes for our healthcare increases, the pension and the pension ADC, and then our other personnel expenses, $6,220 include our group life, unemployment, Medicare, and long-term disability. The materials and supplies, again, the lawsuits is a number that is provided by the city attorney's office, and the city shop charges is provided by general services, and I will talk about those when we talk about auctions in just a minute. And then the personal computer software is a reallocation from information technology where they redirected some expenses back out to various divisions. This accounts for the $359,571 increase year over year. In revenue, typically you do not see much revenue for the for the finance division, but I wanted to indicate this. The other revenues here, where you see that in adopted year over year, in last year's budget, this amount was in unallocated revenue, but this is the amount of revenue that the procurement office has started generating for surplus auctions. And it has significantly grown in the last couple of years, where we were averaging about $2 million per fiscal year. We are now approaching $4.5 million. So that team has done an incredible job of getting all the information together, trying to get all the titles to old vehicles and moving stuff and arranging it in such a way that it has really become a source of revenue. So I wanted that team to get the credit for it. Typically, like I said, it's been sitting over in unallocated revenue, but since they get the city shop charges for it, I'd also like them to have the benefit of the revenue. So this is not new revenue, just moving it from unallocated into the finance division. And again, here is the discussion of the year over year changes in revenues. The revenue from the city auction, some rezoning ordinance and publication fees that come out of John Zena's office, and then donated revenue, which varies year over year, but typically very little, and it usually goes into OBDC. For our personnel information, we are not asking for any increases to our complement, and these are our complements at the legal levels that I discussed at the beginning of our presentation. And then for where we are in our authorized complement, I currently have 15 vacant positions. 8 of them have been posted, and we are working on them. Actually, since we created our presentation for you last week, we do have some offers out in the finance accounting area and in our grants area. And in the budget office, we'll be interviewing next week for a couple of positions. So hopefully we can work on getting those filled as soon as possible. For our materials and supplies, our line items are not too big, the miscellaneous professional services being the largest line item, and we will go into detail in that on the next page, on the next slide. But as you can see, they vary and down to the bottom where, we have about 78,000 of all of those that are under $20,000. For the miscellaneous professional services, these are the line items. As you know, we've talked quite a bit recently about the disparity study that is in OBDC. Our various for Robert Half International, CDT, and other outsourced projects are pretty much across all of our service centers, especially as we've had vacancies and we've had to call contractors in to help us. But that's a little higher than normal for us. So as soon as we can get replacements into our personnel, we should see that number start to come down, we hope. The Cirrus Labs is a procurement project that is merging over our duplicated files. That helps us make sure that we are giving the best information out for bids and procurement. Operation Hope is housed in the administrative service center of the finance division, and that's for our financial literacy. We started doing this in coordination with Operation Hope a couple years ago. The Shelby County Clerk is through, those are printing of the business tax license and the reimbursement from Shelby County Clerk. Contract administration, CDC, where you see the 70,000, that is in procurement. Pay It is our credit card tax system that typically runs through Treasury. Southwest Tennessee Community College, MAMCA, Better Days, and implementing the Sub-to-Prime program. Those are all OBDC projects. Tyler Technologies is the integration of our Treasury system with Pay It, which is the automated payment of property taxes. That is in our Treasury system. And then we have the armored services that goes through with our Treasury services when we are making deposits and pulling monies in from outside of the office. We only have one lease, that is OBDC, which is over at the Universal Life Building. And this is our MWBE utilization as of December 31st, and currently with certified and non-certified spend, the finance division is at 27.32, which is equivalent to last year at 27%.
All right. Councilwoman Johnson?
Good afternoon. Thank you, ma'am.
Councilwoman, will you turn your microphone on, please?
Thank you again. Good afternoon. You were going pretty fast. I was trying to keep up. Let's go page 7. Go back to page 7, please.
Yes, ma'am.
You got finance administration.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that 31%, but can you explain that a little?
Yes, ma'am. So when we have proposed raises for the non-represented employees, we park those raises in one service center within the division so that we can track them. We've done that for every division that you have presented. And then what will happen is, as the budget is approved at whatever rate that might be, then it will be, those raises will be attached individually to each person, and then it will reallocate across the various legal levels.
Okay, let me try to understand that. You're
Sure.
saying basically you don't send the money to each division. You hold on to the money.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. I'm sorry. Just as we are proposing the budget, when we have proposed raises, that particular line item is parked in one service center during the budget process within the division. So, like each division for police, it was probably parked in precinct personnel. For fire, it was probably parked in firefighters, because that's the biggest piece. It just so happens that I'm the first division, and the first service center, and that's where we put it.
So in this case,
Yes, ma'am.
under finance administration,
Yes, ma'am.
you're anticipating needing 31%?
No, ma'am.
more?
No,
It's
ma'am.
so when she's saying service center, she's basically saying instead of seeing, let's say there's $50,000 worth of raises in the administration group, and the other 194,000 are located in accounting, purchasing, budget office, debt management, treasury. Instead of showing those incremental increases, the entire increase for the entire division is showed
Okay.
as 194,845.
Okay,
Yes.
I got you. Let me ask you something, then go back to page 5.
Yes, ma'am.
And we have in personnel services, and we're showing an increase of 4.1%. So what does that represent?
Well, there are several items that are presented in that 4.1%, if you will
You
allow
wanna
me.
take the expenses in, well, how much is
Hold
the
on, let me-
expenses? I'm trying to,
Here we go. I'm sorry, let me get you.
I got you. I see what you did.
Here we
now.
go. There's the 359,000. So in personnel, 182,616 of it is the 2% proposed increase for employees.
I got you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
ma'am.
Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilwoman.
I've got just a couple quick questions. So I'm assuming, and so confirms in 1104, the budget office, you're showing the decrease of 138,000. You think that's just the hiring time period?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the city auctions, what you were saying, typically, even though it goes to unallocated, but typically you said somewhere in the 2 millions. So what drove a 100% increase?
Two things. Believe it or not, the pandemic helped us because we took the auctions online. And that was a tremendous input. And as well as, I think, under Ms. Hardy's supervision, we have had a better collection of data that enables us to move forward with our surplus auctions, and they've been very successful.
Okay. Yep, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Is your inventory the same? Do you have the same number of cars that you're bringing in? That have
No,
the
ma'am,
sa-
it will vary as things move through surplus. So at any given point, it could be a lot of different items. It's not just cars, it's old office furniture. It could be any number of items.
As of today, how are we doing this year?
I'll tell you that.
You can tell me later.
Okay, I gotcha. As of today, we budgeted 3.5 million. I'm sorry, as of May 11th, we were at 4,070,000.
Okay. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you, Chair.
Thank you.
All right, colleagues, any other question on general fund operating for finance? Seeing none, let's move on.
So next is our grants administration, and this will be presented by Crystal Gibbons, who is the manager of grants and compliance for our city.
Good afternoon. Crystal Givens, 170 North Main, Memphis, Tennessee 38103. You ready, Chief Ford? Okay. This is grants administration. This is our organizational chart. We're a very small team within the finance division, as Chief Ford has already shared. We are divided into 3 functions: grants compliance, grants accounting, and projects. Our strategic priorities are addressed by this budget. We provide a focal point for the city of Memphis to enhance its internal compliance with applicable grant policies and regulations. We are here to provide oversight for federal, state, and local grant funding. We conduct subrecipient and subgrantee on-site monitoring reviews. We aid the division in formal site visits. We follow all the requirements set forth by 2 CRF 200 uniform administrative requirements, and we ensure that the city performs a single audit. report is of non-federal agency, expending over $750,000 a year. Very small budget, as you can see, no change from this year to the next year. We're just trending right where we need to be. This is a great slide I really want to point out. Chief Ford mentioned earlier that the city reported over $200 million on a single audit in FY22. This outlines by division how federal dollars and state dollars are expended, and a large part of that is ARPA. The sewer is the WIFIA, W-I-F-A, that's $62 million there, and CIP Falls and HCD are right in line behind that. In FY21, let me share that, we expended about $151 million, and the fiscal year before that was $92 million. So each year we've increased about $50 to $60 million each year. So our major federal programs, these sound familiar. ARPA is number one, $161 million. You have TDEC, $102 million. Of course, CARES, you remember that one. We've spent all that money as well. And these are some of the other programs we want to list. And didn't want to forget our Council Community Grant Program, which is $3.2 million. That runs through our general fund. But the other programs are through our special revenue funds, such as miscellaneous grants, HCD, have some in sewer as well. Okay. So our tiny little team has 8 people. You have a finance compliance manager, there's a grants manager, a couple of coordinators in there, some grant analysts in there as well. We have 2 additional people. We're right now at 6. So we have 2 additional people who will start next Monday. And that really does conclude the presentation for grants. This is just an appendix section. Chief Ford, you want to keep going? Okay. So I want to take a minute to talk about the Council Community Grant Program. We noticed some things have changed going into FY24. The impacts that the grants administration it will have on us and how we're going to address those. We're going to be prepared for those allocation dates per the resolution. So I believe it's August 8th, September 12th, and November 7th. We're preparing to have personnel dedicated to those project dates so that we won't feel the burn that we felt this year in trying to keep up with all of demand, okay? Also, your final report date is May 1st of 2024. Again, we'll be available to address that by putting more personnel, just realigning personnel to meet those demands. This is just an organizational chart when you have time to kind of flow through. I think some of the questions we've had in the past was, why does it take so long? And this may help address some of that. What we're doing once we get the application package, how we're reviewing those documents, and the process it takes to get it all the way to the end to get the first payment out if they're, well, that won't happen in FY24. They're getting one lump sum of payment in 24. So this process mapping kind of speaks to that. This is a great, this is a pull from our annual report. These next couple of pages are a single audit. This outlines the $200 million I talked about earlier that the city is responsible for just expending in just FY24. I know you can't read the writing, but it should be a little bigger from here. This is just a grants dashboard to outline that this team covers 525 active awards by various divisions, appropriation, that's $1.9 billion that we are trying to help cover and provide guidance for. Yes, ma'am. Same slide here as well. You can see those awards divided by type. And we have a lot of federal awards. And the division that has the most is HCD. You've seen this slide before as well. It's on the city's website. This is our American Rescue Plan Act. It shows how we're currently spending those dollars, and you can go there. It's very active. It is live. We are on the spend down. Only $96 million has been spent, and we have, I can't tell from here how much is left, but we are over halfway there, 60% there. So we don't carry the load by ourselves. While there are 8 of us in the finance division, we partner with our divisions, and each division has a grant liaison. And this graph just outlines how many people we work with. So to give you an example, I'd like to pick on MPD. We partner with MPD. They have 3 police. MPD has 3 grant personnel that we work with to help carry that load on their grants. And again, it's just divided by division. So about 37. This is our last slide. Just this year, we rolled out a grant summit, and our 3rd session will be June 15th. Well, we'll cover grant compliance and closeouts. We've done a session 1 and a session 2. This is just for the divisions. It's not currently open to any of our external grantees, but we make sure they're educated on how to manage their grant. Our office, we go out and seek education, get the training that we need to make sure that our divisions have what they need to manage their grant. That's all I have.
Councilman Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we've had come to our council is Chairman Jones is constantly harping about how we need to do more with grants or what we can do with grants. Is there anything that you and he have talked about that we as a council should know moving forward as far as making your life easier and more grants coming into our city?
All right, well, the good thing about our department is that we are there for the award stage and the closeout stage. Our divisions help with the pre-award stage. So they're out trying to grab those federal funds.
So are y'all applying for those grants or you just manage them?
We manage them, and we help the divisions apply for those if they need help. Yes.
So do you think we need to have you being the ones out there beating the bushes for it? Do you need a department that does that more specifically?
I think because we are decentralized, which means the divisions help carry their load on the front end, there's enough work for everyone. Because they are the SMEs for the divisions, they would know better than we would. Makes sense?
I'm just, looking and going back at if every division is doing it,
right,
it's almost like nobody's really in charge of it. So I'm just wondering, as we move forward, is it something that we as a council should think about? I mean, or is it just too much administrative that we shouldn't be involved in it? And you guys can tell us why it's a bad idea.
So all of the grants come through the COO's office. It goes through the leadership team. So
correct.
When there is a grant opportunity, all of the divisions communicate with the COO's office in terms of going after those grants. Sometimes there are dollars associated with getting those grants, meaning they need to hire a consultant to help to write the grant because it does require a significant amount of subject matter expertise in order to grab those grants. So there is coordination up through the COO and mayor's office around the grants that we go after.
So we get information from the National League of Cities about grant opportunities. How do y'all get those who's in charge of reviewing that and bringing it to us for our different departments?
We are also a part of the National League of Cities, so we receive that information as well. Through our Intergovernmental Affairs Office, we receive contact from anybody from that organization, or sometimes we'll get contact from the state, when they have different grants. So basically, through that office in particular, we reach out and look for those grants. And the departments themselves, because they are part of professional organizations, they have relationships with TDEC, with TVA. Well, TVA is more of MLGW, but with all of these organizations that have federal dollars or state dollars, they have those relationships so that they can go after those dollars as well.
So during your sort of weekly executive meeting, grant opportunities are part on the agenda pretty much every week as these things come available. How's that work?
I'm sorry, I missed that question. I do have,
During
Director
weekly
Zena.
executive meetings, grant opportunities are brought forward to the executive team on a regular basis. Is that how it works?
So we have biweekly COO meetings, and we may discuss them there, or just on our one-on-one meetings that I have every other week with all the division directors. We discuss them at that point as well.
Right.
But I want to recognize Director Zena to
But
talk a
how
little
do you
bit.
know? How do you know if they are or aren't missing grants? I think that's the drive. Like, there are hundreds of thousands of grant opportunities that are NGOs and federal and state, et cetera. And unless you've got somebody who's living and breathing grants, period, and that's the sole responsibility of their job, it's inevitable that we miss some. And even if you're meeting with your division heads, if they don't have someone in their division that says you're to scour the earth on a yearly, on a daily basis to hunt down everything that has to do with fire suppression and fire systems and fire prevention and fire education on every NGO and every government, and that's what they do, then you can't possibly cover it all. It would be, you couldn't make that argument.
And I just want to share again, the SMEs are at the division level. So about fire up as an example, they have a staff dedicated to just working
I
on
know
fire
she
goals.
does. That's why I
Okay.
use them as an example.
Yeah. And police does the same thing. Animal services, HCD, of course, they all specialize on that. So
They have somebody in each division,
yes,
in
we have
each
a-
service center whose full-time job.
if you can go back to the slide.
We've asked that question, and that's not the answer we got last council meeting. So
So-
that's a different answer than what we've gotten before, at least that I remember.
So there are about 37 that come to our grant conference, and just the division count. I don't have names, but just the division count of who we work with.
So just again, to make sure we're clear, and I'm not trying to be argumentative, I just want to be crystal clear that we understand. You're telling me that fire has 4 individuals whose sole responsibility as an employee of the fire division is grant writing opportunities.
No one is a sole grant writer, and I want to invite Director Zena to explain why that is an important distinction.
Yes, let's invite the Director of the Division of Planning and Development to talk grants. Director Zena.
Well, one thing to add, John Zena, Planning and Development, one thing to add to the discussion about how we find out about grants, I think why it was particularly relevant that Chief Ford and Chief Ryan asked me to be a part of this discussion is that within Planning and Development, we have our Regional Transportation Planning Department, which is staffs the regional MPO. MPO stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization. That is a federal designation for federal transportation funds that come to every urbanized region in the country. And so for Memphis's urbanized area, federal transportation funds that are allocated by formula are managed by our Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is the elected leadership of every municipality and county within our region, as well as transportation agencies like MATA. And so our staff staffs that organization, and not only do we help assist with the formula transportation funding, but we also help assist with disseminating information about state and federal transportation grants that become available on a routine basis. So we have a staff that is, their job is to help facilitate grants into the hands of partner jurisdictions, Memphis and agencies like MATA included. Now, in many cases, because competitive federal grants are now a last dollars in proposition and not a first dollars in like they used to be, the projects that are being pursued are projects that have already been in the works for some time. So what you don't want is someone who is just grasping at whatever. You want to make sure that we are situating grant dollars to help advance a project that is already well underway so that those last dollars in can get it over the finish line and that project can push forward. I'll give you a good example. The grant that MATA received a few years ago, the program is called RAISE now. It used to be called BUILD. They received a $12 million grant for the BRT that goes east and west. That is a $125 million project. So that is a highly competitive grant. Fewer than 10% of applicants actually get grants from the RAISE, from BUILD. But that was the last dollars in where they had already started project design because, again, this is the last dollars in type of proposition. Now, just to the point of dedicated employees, not only do we have in our division, and this is just shared as a means of an example of how we experience grants. Not only do we have our regional transportation department, but we also have other departments such as comprehensive planning, sustainability, and resilience. They all use grants to help advance our programs, but again, it is a means to an end. We don't have anyone who is solely dedicated to going out and getting grants. What we have are subject matter experts who not only can get grants, but they can also manage projects and plan accordingly so that we're able to use grants as a means to an end to accomplish our departmental goals. And so that is a part of their responsibilities, and we have multiple people, more than two certainly, who that's part of their responsibilities, identifying funding to be able to advance our programs. But we don't have anyone whose sole purpose is purely to go get grants. And then maybe to another point that was made before, a lot of these grants, because they're highly technical, we do have to hire consultants. If you're doing a transportation grant application, you've got to run a complex model that there may only be one modeler in the whole metro area, and they're with Kimley Horn, who can perform that analysis to help you apply for that grant. So it's not as simple as just filling out the application. There's a whole lot of complex, expensive analysis that typically goes into these grant applications now.
Yeah, thank you, Director Zena. Point taken. A lot of the dollars you're talking about, again, are specifically for capital expenditures, which are all usually last dollars in. There are several programmatic grants out there, whether they be federal, state, or NGOs. And I think that's more what we're talking about, where they're either matching, they're going to quasi-government, governmental agencies that we oversee. To your point, we have, a ton of subject matter expertise in-house and sometimes out-of-house. And so I think we're talking more about programmatic dollars than necessarily hard dollars. We're talking about both of them, but I've never seen, us miss major headline projects. And I do understand what you're talking about when you talk about last dollars in for infrastructure improvements, et cetera. Councilwoman Johnson, then Chairman Jones. Actually, before we do that, let the record show Chairman Jones is here, Councilwoman Easter Thomas is here, Councilwoman Swearingen Washington is here, Councilwoman Robinson is here, Vice Chairman Smiley, and Councilman Canale is here. Councilwoman Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, this past year, how many grants did you actually apply for, and how many did you not receive?
So we use a process called the request to submit process, where the division starts with the application sent to us. So on average, more than 100. It's been several, and it's crossed several divisions. To my knowledge, at that point, they're applying. To my knowledge, we have not been denied anything we've applied for.
So this past year, you applied for 100 different grants.
Up to 100, yes, ma'am.
Up
yes,
to
ma'am.
100.
Yes. It's been quite a few. Some of them are recurring grants. We're going to get them every year anyway, so the process, you just reapply again. Mm-hmm. Some of them are really small, so we consider those grants as well. They may not be federal, but they're local. So we include those as well. But they're all going through the process to the COO's office, the mayor's office, and through legal. Yes, ma'am.
I guess the question is then, how do you evaluate your effectiveness as far as coming and getting new grants and enhancing the funds that we get in? How are we looking at it from that viewpoint to say, yes, we did a good job. We were able to pick up an extra few millions because of our efforts?
I think that's a great question. So that could be speaking to what my team does. We're evaluating those programmatic areas where we've met the goals from the grantee, and we're on slated to get it again in the next year. And so how you evaluate that, I think the divisions also can probably, speak to that, but on their behalf. They are still going after that, and we haven't had any issues with a grantor where they said we could not have funding again. Mm-hmm. So I think it's both. I think it's both. Anybody else can add.
This year, for instance, how many, dollar amount has it increased? Were you anticipating this year an increase?
We've expended $200 million in FY22. I anticipate to be the same thing when we do our single audit again next year. It's going to be About
About
around
the
the same
same.
amount. Yes, ma'am.
Gotcha. Okay, that was my question. Thank you, Chair.
Chairman Jones.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Mrs. Zainab, going back to some of your comments about the MPO. The MPOs have been around for quite some time, correct?
To my knowledge, since the 1970s or
Okay.
1980s.
So I guess what we've found, and like I said, you're talking about part-timers who go to 1, 2, maybe 3 conferences a year. The MPO process, has that changed much since you've been in your position?
Not substantially, no.
Okay. What I'm getting at here is and we're just using the MPO as an example. A lot of those are federal funds that flow to the state and then they flow to us. But what we found is that, and one of the things that we sort of lobbied for when we were in DC, just like with the CARES, there were direct allocations to cities, bypassing the state. And so what we were advocating for, when we met with Senator Blackburn's representatives and Senator Haggerty's representatives, we were talking about, hey, we would like to see more, if possible, see more funds that would directly come to state or come to cities, bypassing what the state may be. So I'm getting at maybe what has been the process. If we're talking about the MPO, that process may not have changed, but when it comes to other grants, perhaps, like I said, I'm not the expert. It seems like there is a greater amount of funds that can flow directly to us. And are we positioned in a manner to maximize and go after those?
I see what you're asking. So there's 2 different types of funds that we're talking about here. The ones that flow through the state, through the MPO, those are formula dollars based
Right.
on population and other criteria. And then there's also the competitive grants. And so in prior years, before the bipartisan infrastructure law, there were a couple of programs like RAISE that I mentioned a moment ago, that before that it was called BUILD, before that it was called Tiger. And then there was another grant called Infra, and that probably had a different name too. But since the bipartisan infrastructure law was put into place, those programs have been reauthorized and more money flows through them now. And there are additional programs that the Federal Department of Transportation has created to make dollars available on a competitive basis directly to municipalities, counties, et cetera. And so, yes, there's more money from the federal government for transportation that's on the street than there used to be, and certainly than is available through formula dollars. So since the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed, to my knowledge, we have applied for every transportation grant except for the infra, which is the program that's being used to pay for the Lamar project, the Lamar widening. And the infra program is dedicated for extremely large, costly projects. And just to my knowledge, I don't believe that anyone has put forth any idea, to fit that bill. But for all the others, RAISE, reconnecting communities, safe streets and roads for all, there's probably a couple others, there have been applications submitted.
Okay. And so my question is, are we adequately positioned? And I guess I was under the impression that there are other departments where this flow is coming directly from the federal to cities outside of the transportation department. It seems like we're sort of focusing in on just the transportation dollars, but I was under the impression that, and I left my computer in the office.
You're correct. There are a couple of other programs that are part of bipartisan infrastructure law that aren't transportation related. But again, it's my impression that the programs where the city is eligible to submit an application, maybe with only a couple of exceptions, there are applications that have been submitted. There's a brownfields program, for example. I know applications were submitted for that. There's a smart grid program that I know MLGW submitted for. By and large, the city or its affiliates is pursuing each of those grants under the bipartisan infrastructure law so far.
Okay. And then my next point is when we look at these 37 individuals, are there measurables? Because, I'm just thinking about that one person, for example, in legal. I know it's not their primary job to do that, and I think that's what, as I envision things, perhaps if we look at those 12, 15, whatever number of divisions that we have, even if with measurables in place, goals in place, if we're looking at 100,000, I'm just throwing a number out there, $100,000 per employee, we're talking about 15 individuals, that $1.5 million that we have to expand for those individuals, I think that with measurables for those individuals, more than pays for itself. And so if there was some type of alignment among the divisions to do that, where we have somebody solely focused on that, I just think that can bear fruit for us. Just my commentary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Jones. I guess I'll follow up with one final thought or / question, which is, how is it then, over the last 5 years, on a per capita basis, we received one of the lowest allocations of state grant funding in the state, both at the county level and the city level? Is it inadequate representation at the state? Is it we didn't apply for the right grants? Is it, how is that, what is the answer to that question?
So the first question is, are we going after grants that are items that we think are important for our city? So that's the first analysis we have to do. What Director Zena talked about was, number one, do we have a project that we're looking to fund that is, this is a good grant to go after? Otherwise, we will be trying to match dollars for something that's not important to us. That would be my first question. But in general, I do think that, the team does a great job with finding grant dollars. Just by looking at the presentation from Crystal and the amount of dollars that we have received just even in this year, I feel that we have the adequate staff to go and seek after grants as we have been doing for the last few years. I don't see a need at this point for there to be a shift in how we are approaching these grants.
That can be your position. I'll restate a fact. We receive, on average, over the last 5 years, and we are in the lowest quintile on a per capita basis of state grant funding, full stop. So I'll pose the question, and I guess, again, generally, and we'll just move on, but it's either we're not pursuing or we're inadequately represented. It's one or the other. I'm not trying to poke fingers at any one of our state reps at all by any stretch, but that's a fact. And I'm happy to send that information to you from our TASR guide. And so, and the problem is that it's not just state grant funding, it's federal block grants that head down to the state that filter through. So we've spent enough time on it, so I'm fine to move on, unless anybody else has any other.
You get copies of that?
I'll email it to you today. I actually was looking at it for something else and ran back across, but we approved. I think I sent it to Jonesy while we were doing it a long time ago, and I know I sent it to Chief McGowan. But we were looking at post-grant award processes, meaning the state streamlining how they award grants to local municipalities, because unlike us, there are plenty of small townships and towns of 20, 50,000 people, or counties that don't have the budgets to support staff to write for grants or apply or even manage them, where we have an entire team that can administer grants and do the post-award paperwork, which is significant, especially for ongoing programs. And in that was were the data points on while we receive some of the highest amounts of hard dollars on a per capita basis, we are in the lowest quintile.
Well, Budget Chair, when you said more, it just triggered memories for me. So thank you for saying more so that I can make this clarification. You're absolutely right. We have found that there were instances where just the way that the grant was structured, we didn't get our fair shake. For example, with libraries, there was a structure in place where there was an equal amount given to several municipalities, but Director McCloy was able to have conversations with the state to say, we need to look at how this is structured because we have a different population than maybe Chattanooga or maybe, some of these other smaller municipalities. So they were able to restructure that grant. That's one example. And I do know that we've had conversations about the block grant that we haven't been successful, but we have been raising exactly the points that you've been making, that some of the formulas are just not right for us.
Yeah, and so I guess if that's the point too, then, those are things that the council couldn't be made aware of unless you inform us. And that's, going forward, the things where, again, I think Jones, again, talks about this, and to some degree I concur with him, which is, you guys are responsible, and this is not a slight, this is more of a request. We're responsible for appropriations and zoning, and passing ordinances, and the administration is responsible for administering the government based on that, right, and state law. And so we're unaware of formula issues or things like that where we could help be a lobby for that effort through our contacts, because libraries is a very good example of the books program. I can't remember what they called it, but it goes back to, and I'm not trying to put you on the record saying we have a representation problem, but it's more about these are where the fixes have to occur. That has to go on the record, and that is I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's more so that Big Shelby ain't so big anymore. So, all right, enough on grants. By the way, in your packets, there's a city council grant flow chart. Take a quick peek in that as we bear down on council grant season, everybody's favorite use of time. Hey, Crystal, thanks so much. Appreciate you. Here's the thing: is that even if you wanted to have it again, it's the administration's job to administer the government. So even if you wanted to give money for it, if they don't feel like it's something that they deem necessary, it would just sit somewhere. I'm sure Shirley will find a spot for it, but to indicate that it would be specific to that would be difficult. You'd be probably overstepping we'd be overstepping our authority. But I think, again, the council's made its point, the administration's entitled to its position, and thus the structure of our charter. All right.
Thank you, Council. For this section related to our debt service fund, Deputy CFO Andre Walker will be making the presentation.
Andre, what's going on, man?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Andre Walker, 125 North Main Street. Okay, let's go to slide 2. Fund overview. So the debt service fund is primarily used to ensure timely payments of principal and interest on the city's outstanding indebtedness, excluding debt issued for the sanitary sewer system and the stormwater system. The debt service fund has 2 primary sources of revenue. It receives 31.37% allocation of property tax levy and 7% of the local option sales tax revenue. Other revenue sources include specific revenue pledged to pay special revenue debt, federal subsidy payments, and transfers from other funds to pay certain debt obligations. Next slide. There are 3 types of debt administered in the debt service fund. We got general obligation debt, which is secured by the city's full faith and credit and taxing authority. And that includes GO bonds, commercial paper, bonds issued by the New Memphis Arena Public Building Authority for Accelerate Memphis, and there is a proposed loan for the Solid Waste Division through the Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund. Documents related to that will be presented to council tomorrow during the budget committee.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure I clearly understand, because this is, all right, so when we did Accelerate, we did 180 million in CAB, right? And then
Yes.
we issued 20 million in GO debt. Yeah?
The cabs were the GO debt.
The CABs are considered GO debt.
Yes.
It's just the structure of the capital, it's more about the bond itself. Okay.
Yes.
The 20 million and how that bond's structured, how the interest begins, okay. All right.
Yep.
And then the 20 million was issued all through this,
Through Edge.
through Edge. Got it.
And we're paying interest on those bonds.
Yeah, they were the issuing authority, and we're standing behind it.
That's
yeah?
correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right. Speaking of Edge, we got appropriation obligation debt, which is secured by the city's pledge to appropriate funds to pay the debt service on those indebtedness. It includes capital leases, qualified energy conservation bonds, revenue refunding bonds issued by Edge for the Electrolux project, and economic development bonds issued by Edge for Accelerate Memphis. And finally, we have special revenue debt, which is secured by and repaid using specific pledged revenue. And special revenue debt is usually issued through a conduit issuer on behalf of the city for economic development projects. It includes TDZ revenue bonds. We got the downtown TDZ and the Liberty Park TDZ, all issued by Edge. And we got sports facility revenue bonds issued by Memphis Center City Revenue Finance Corporation for AutoZone Park. Next slide. All right, general obligation debt. As of June 30th, we will have $1,483,000,000 in GO bonds outstanding. For FY 2024, debt service on the GO bonds is $152.6 million. Highlighted in green towards the middle, we got the Series 2018 GO bonds. A portion of those bonds, $171 million of those bonds, were issued to provide funds for improvements to the convention center. Although they are secured by the city's full faith and credit, they are payable using hotel motel tax revenues. The debt service on those bonds is $6.6 million. So you'll see a transfer from the hotel motel fund to the debt service fund to pay the debt service on that $171 million in bonds. Below the GO bonds, we got commercial paper. By June 30th, we have about $50 million in commercial paper outstanding. Currently, we got about $35 million. But by the end of next fiscal year, we would have drawn down the full $150 million. We're projecting debt service on the commercial paper, or we budgeted debt service on commercial paper, totaling $4.9 million. Now, that includes about $2 million of cushion, because interest rates, short-term interest rates, are very volatile. We want to make sure we have enough capacity to pay the interest on those commercial paper. And then finally, we got that $6.8 million proposed TMBF loan for solid waste. Debt service on it will be about $900,000. Next slide. Appropriation obligation. We'll start with revenue refunding bonds for the Electrolux project issued by Edge. Now, the debt service on those bonds is payable by the city and the county on a 50-50 basis. The city's outstanding share is $13.5 million, and the debt service on it is $1.3 million. There's $2.5 million of solid waste leases outstanding. Debt service on it about $1.7 million. Qualified energy conservation bonds, $1.9 million outstanding. Debt service on it, $1.1 million. And again, we have the economic development bonds issued for Accelerate Memphis. $24.3 million outstanding. Debt service on it is $1.9 million. Next slide. Special revenue bonds. So we got the downtown TDZ revenue bonds, a little under $103 million, got $102.9 million outstanding. Debt service on those bonds, $15.6 million. We got the Liberty Park TDZ revenue bonds, $69.6 million outstanding as of June 30. Debt service on it is $2.3 million. Now, of that $2.3 million, $1.8 is interest and $500,000 is principal. The interest portion is payable using bond proceeds that were set aside when we issued the bonds to pay the interest on the bonds for the first 2 years or so.
So yeah, it's the 1.8 is the capitalized interest.
Yes, exactly. Finally, sports facility revenue bonds for AutoZone Park, $12.3 million outstanding. Debt service on it is $2.2 million. Next slide. Total debt service, all right, GO debt, $158.4 million in debt service. Appropriation obligation debt, $6 million in debt service. Special revenue debt, $20.1 million in debt service. Total debt service, 184.5. Looking at the right to the top of that 184.5, $113.9 million is principal, and $70.6 million is interest. Next slide. All right, we'll start with the expenditures. In the middle, highlighted in blue, you'll see we got the principal payments, the $113.9 that we just mentioned on the other slide, and we got the interest payments of $70.6 million. To the top, the second row from the top, we got bank fees of $700,000. Now that is mostly related to the city's commercial paper program. The majority of that goes to State Street Bank, who provides liquidity for the city's program, and then also to Goldman Sachs, which serves as the remarketing agent for the program. They go out and find investors for the city's commercial paper. So total expenditures, $185.7 million. Next slide. So revenue sources, how are we going to pay that debt service? Let's start at the bottom. You see highlighted in blue. This is the capitalized interest that you mentioned. $1.8 million for the Liberty Park TDZ revenue bonds. Then above that, also highlighted in blue, you see $6.6 million. That's the transfer in from the hotel motel fund to pay the debt service on the portion of the 2018 bonds that were issued to fund improvements to the convention center. And let's go to the bottom. You see $5.4 million contribution committed fund balance. That's the $5.4 million use of fund balance. We're expecting to have about $50 to $53 million in committed fund balance as of June 30th. And we're going to use 5.4 of that to pay the debt service. We're projecting a use of fund balance between now and 2026. Every year, we anticipate using fund balance to pay the debt service. Pursuant to the debt policy, the debt service fund has a fund balance goal of 1/12 of the expenditures, which equates to about $15.5 million of that 185. So we won't get to the minimum. We'll still be above the minimum goal for the fund balance of the debt service fund. And I think that is the last slide that concludes.
Very, very well, sir. I think it's very helpful. On the TDZ bonds for Liberty Park, we use capitalized, you have 2 years capitalized interest, so we'll burn through that. And then I guess what is the current cash balance of the trustees account?
$0.
When did we set the down year? 2019 or 2020?
2021 is when we approved July of 2021. We would get our first distribution of TDZ revenue for the Liberty Park TDZ September, end of September.
And will that be provided on an annual? How do they reconcile that for state? Is that an annual basis?
Yes, annual basis, one check every September.
Have you guys looked at a forecast based on? I didn't know this. Doug McGowan had to teach me this, which I found fascinating. And Mr. Walker, correct me if I'm wrong here, please. But the way that the increment actually works is not your property is worth $1, or you do $1 in sales this year, and if you do $3 in sales the next year, you get those $2. It's in 2021, Shelby County had a basis of X. the area itself that the TDZ is in has a basis of really of X or Y, and they look at how much Shelby County grew in relationship to the actual zone itself. So then it's that difference that you receive back in your funding mechanism. So it's a unique evaluation, and internet sales tax also comes into play. I know that was something that the administration was working on that wasn't super fair. I don't even know where we wrapped up. I don't think we got as far as we wanted to. Yeah, leave that for a different day. So I guess, have you guys had an opportunity to look at any forecasting?
To be honest with you, right now, we don't know because, again, it'd be the first time we receive payment. But in addition to the capitalized interest, we set aside $4 million in a special revenue or reserve fund.
In a reserve, yeah.
In the event interest or TDZ revenue does not come in sufficient to pay the debt service.
Smart. Well, you need good development. You don't need development. I've had to hear that my entire career. So, but yes, I hear what you're saying. You want increment to the area is critical. Chairman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report, Mr. Walker. My first question is, and I know it's hard to project this, but can you give us an idea of what the rise in interest rates, how that has affected us? And I'm thinking about what would usually be a premium that we receive from an issuance. Let's just say if we were to issue that same those bonds for Accelerate Memphis. We issued a certain amount of bonds, but based upon interest rates and our coupon on it, we actually got more than the proceeds were.
Yes, sir.
So like I said, this is just a projection and off your cuff, where we may have received X amount based upon where interest rates were then. If we were to issue the same amount, what type of excess would we
I'll give you an
experience?
example. So I spoke about the $171 million of that 2018 GO bond issue. It provided $175 million in proceeds. So we got about $4 million in premium. And as you stated, all right, so the premium that we get on our bonds is the difference between the yield on the bonds and the interest rate that we pay. The greater that difference is, and the longer the bonds mature, the greater premium that we're going to get. Over the past year or so, interest rates have been increasing and rising and rising and rising. On our commercial paper, a few years ago, we were paying 11 basis points. Today, we're paying 3.24% on 30-day paper. Significant increase. If this federal deficit issue doesn't get resolved, then we anticipate that interest rates will continue to rise. And as interest rates rise, typically bondholders want like a 5% coupon. If the yield is 4% and the coupon is 5%, I don't know, maybe we'll sell the bonds at a price, I'm just going to make up something, around 110, so an extra 10%. But as that yield increases close to that 5%, then it is closer to par. We might not get any premium.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Curious about, I'm on page 9. We saw talk about the ad valorem tax current going from 125, 2023, 126, forecast to be 124, and then we're projecting 122 for this year.
You know, you guys have a lot of excellent questions. I specifically didn't mention that because I didn't want to address that question. But I do have an answer for you. It is due to the annexation obligation. This past year, We de-annexed 5 areas. One of the areas this year paid less in the de-annexation obligation than they did year before, to the tune of $1 million. The debt service fund gets about 68% of the de-annexation obligation. So because of that, we took a $680,000 hit. That's why this year is coming in a little bit lower than last year. We have budgeted 126. We're going to forecast around $124 million. Next year, FY 2024, there's a decrease of $1.4 million. Actually, it was higher than that. It's like $2.8 million decrease. When we look at the de-annexation obligation, we got Southwind Windike and we got South Cordova. Both, one of them, I think Southwind Windike made their last de-annexation obligation payment this year. They're not going to pay anything next year. South Cordova, their de-annexation obligation payment will be like a certain percentage of maybe 25, 30% of what they paid this year. Those two combined, there's a decrease of about $4 million. 68% of that, again, $2.8 million hit on the debt service fund. We're projecting an increase in realty taxes next year to the tune of $4 million. As I mentioned before, the debt service fund gets 31.37%. So that is about, I forget the numbers, about $1.3 million increase. So we subtract the 1.3 from the 2.7, we get a net decrease of $1.4 million compared to this year.
Okay. So as we look out, let's just say for the next 2, 3, 5 years, will we see will that decrease continue or will we stabilize at some point?
After next year, as far as de-annexation obligation payments, it's only about $1 million left.
Okay.
Over the next 2 years or so.
Okay.
So it's not material.
Okay. I noticed that dividend and interest on investment, we don't expect any, but with interest rates going up, we won't be earning any.
Yeah, let's see. Actually, interest is, where is it? Use of money in property. You see, last year, FY22, we had a negative $1.3 million.
Right.
That's due to the market. Some of the, we had to do a valuation at June 30th, and, as interest rates went up, the value of our investments decreased, which is what happened to Silicon Valley Bank, one of the reasons why they got in trouble. We budgeted $200,000 this year. We're forecasting $3 million in interest earnings this year. We're going to hold it constant for next year also.
Okay.
So you code that as what FFC is fiscal, what's the designation from an accounting standpoint in the line? In your account number. So you've got all your account numbers to the left, right? 040, 110, ad valorem, right? Yeah. So what's the designation of FFC?
It stands in, it's a section 455. It's a standalone.
It's standalone accounts because that's what I was, yeah. Okay, thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Jones. Real quick, could you send me the bond payment schedule for the TDZ revenue bonds when you get a chance?
Sure, no
Thank
problem.
you. Councilman Warren.
This may just show my ignorance, but how do we look on this and see where that debt cliff is coming from these bonds, or do they have anything to do with it?
All the above.
Right. This is just a 1-year lookout. The debt cliff occurs in FY20.
But if you look at I'm looking, we got a list of all these obligation bonds at the very front, right?
Yep.
So I'm assuming some of those have to go away to get a death cliff somewhere. So where is that in that list of bonds?
Let's see. I guess what we could do, if you look at looking at slide 4, look at the last column, final maturity.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
And so it's the ones that go in 24?
24, 25. Let's
26.
see, there's 26, another 25.
So it looks like we got a debt cliff coming up real quick. So it's not all in 26. It looks like there's a debt cliff that starts in 24 and then hits us in 25 and 26. Is that right? Or am I reading that wrong?
Well, I don't know that you're gonna have a huge savings on $385,000.
Right.
Yeah. But the other one though is like, is that 39 million, 57 million, 76 million, 45, 45 million?
Yeah, so keep
Right
in
there.
mind,
So
Jeff,
it looks like those are not all coming in 26. So we've been
That's
told
correct.
to look for it in 26. Why are we looking for it in 26 when those are cutting in 25?
that's when all of it is off the books. So when you all are budgeting in 2025, you're doing so for the 2026 fiscal year, and you'll have a little bit more money then.
So we'll
but-
be able to budget in 25 based on this. We don't have to wait till 26 to budget for that.
Thank you, Chief. One of the things that Chief Forrest mentioned is that when you look at the debt cliff, we're going to issue bonds like every 18 months to take out commercial paper. So looking at this, you don't see the full story.
Well, that's, again, I understand that I won't understand the full story, but I am trying to get a little bit better understanding.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, colleagues, any other questions? I think this is hugely helpful to get an idea of how we really function.
I do have one other question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Chairman Jones.
Ms. Walker, you talked about if we have, we'll have a reappraisal next year, correct?
In 2 years.
Yeah, we every 4 years.
Okay, so you talked about some type of real estate increase. What was?
That's another. All right, so I think what you're referring to is, which is what Councilwoman Johnson actually brought to our attention. There's, we did the reappraisal 2 years ago, and then 2 years after the reappraisal, there's this thing called the sales ratio or appraisal ratio. I think that's what you're talking about. Yep.
The state stuff?
Yes, sir.
Okay, gotcha.
And,
Okay.
Treasurer Miller is going to do the guy right there. He's doing a presentation tomorrow to cover all of that, and I don't want to steal his thunder.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Jones. Mr. Walker, really appreciate you had a chance the other day to sit down with an attorney from Butler that you work with all the time. Just nothing but good things to say. So I appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you, sir.
Chief Ford, kicking it back to you, it appears, for special revenue funds.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you to Andre. He predates me, and he is amazing, and he has helped me and taught me those things as I came in, not as just the comptroller, but as the CFO, and he is an invaluable asset when it comes to debt management. So thank you.
Yeah, I think the commercial paper program is one of the smartest things the city's done.
It really is.
My question, I guess, it's probably more over a cup of coffee, is what you, to the point is where we end up as rate. If rates don't settle in, I mean, you still have to have liquidity.
Yes.
The problem is that if rates don't settle down, look, if I knew where the rates were going to be, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys. But I'll be interested to see what impact that has on not us, but just in like municipalities around the country and large corporations that utilize commercial paper for liquidity purposes. And as they go to set corporate bond rates, I mean, you look at Ford, right? Like they've got to go refinance. I mean, billions. Yeah. Okay, I'd love to just, if you don't mind, Chief Ford.
So I mentioned that we're paying State Street Bank money to service liquidity for the program. The facility we have with them expires this October. One of the things we're going to do is send out an RFP and try to get other ideas from the street as to is there any other type of thing that the funding mechanism the city can do instead of commercial paper. With interest rates on the short term being higher than they are in the middle, one of the things that we used to do when I first joined the city was we didn't have a commercial paper program at that time. We issued bond anticipation notes. bond anticipation notes can go out 2 years, it may be that the 30-day rate, the 60-day rate, 90-day rate on commercial paper may be higher than a 2-year note. If that is the case, the authorization that we have to issue commercial paper can be used to issue just 2-year bond anticipation note. Commercial paper is actually a form of a bond anticipation note. So that's one of the things that we will look at as we keep an eye on where the interest rate, where the market is going.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I'd be fine working that group. Best of luck.
All right. All right, Chief Ford, take us away.
Okay, so there are a couple special revenue funds that we also have to present budgets for, and that for your consideration. Some of them are pretty straightforward, others may be a little more complex, but today we're going to be looking at the State Street Aid. That is the gasoline tax revenues received from the state of Tennessee. And as you know, let me remind you, at the end of the year, we look at all of those revenues compared to the expenditures that have gone for very specific items that are allowable and approved under State Street Aid. I'm sorry. Oh, I did. Oh, thank you. No wonder you were just looking at me like, what? Thank you. I apologize for that. I didn't move my own slide. So that those will come in into the State Street Aid, and then they get dispersed at the end of the year. So there's typically not, that fund doesn't carry a balance. Whatever comes in gets redistributed back out. The Hotel Motel Fund, most of you are very familiar with this, but this is the proceeds of the hotel occupancy tax. Part of that is used to pay the outstanding bond indebtedness to the Sports Authority for the FedEx Forum, to provide repair and maintenance to the Renaissance Convention Center, and to facilitate collection of a room tax that is payable to the Memphis Convention and Visitors Bureau. So a lot comes in, but a lot goes out. The New Memphis Arena Fund, this is revenues from the MLG&W water pilot that is used for the payment to the Memphis Shelby County Sports Authority. And the one that we've had a lot of discussion about over the last couple of years is the 2019 Sales Tax Referendum Special Revenue Fund, and those represent the funds that are generated from the sales tax referendum, and we'll go into more detail for that budget. The Pre-K Fund, which you helped establish by ordinance to provide a comprehensive needs-based pre-K education program for children all across the Shelby County, which is wonderful. And then last but not least, one of our internal service funds is the Unemployment Fund, and that's really just, we are self-funded, and that's just the fund established to manage the city's unemployment liabilities. So, State Street Aid. These are the types of, and we, if I may for just a moment, Chairman, we talked a little bit about the budget ordinance and the change and what that would look like. This is the compliance to that, and this is what you'll be seeing in our final budget for everyone. The hotel motel tax, you can see your actuals, our adopted budget, our forecast, and our proposed for next year. We try to stay a little bit conservative on these because we don't want to overproject revenue specifically for revenue that is being used to pay debt service. So we want to be as realistic on those as we possibly can. The New Memphis Arena, this is money in, money out. It comes in $2.5 million, goes right back out. The transfer in there that you see, and I think Deputy Walker kind of alluded to this, is there's a 50-50 split. So if we have CapEx items that are due, we split with Shelby County, and that was our portion in FY22. Sales Tax Referendum Fund, again, this fund continues to outpace some of our projections. We adopted a budget of 68 million. We're forecasting 73, might even be inching up a little bit into the 74, but we are proposing for FY24 76. It continues to be on the rise. The materials and expenditures there for the forecast. Those were some of those specific projects that were approved last year related to spending of some of the fund balance toward street maintenance, and that's what those project costs are. And then the transfers out are the monies that are going to the general fund and to the pre-K fund, and I can give you a breakdown of what those transfers out look like for FY24 proposed. Again, the pre-K fund. Oh, wait, I have two hotel tables. Sorry. The pre-K fund, now by ordinance last year, City Council approved that this will be funded from Fund 245. So that is one of the transfers out that comes from 245 directly into the pre-K fund. It is capped at $7 million, but the proposed budget for pre-K for FY24 is $6.5 million. The unemployment fund, again, we are self-funded. This is just the money come from the employer contributions toward this, and then we look at the claims incurred, and as you can see, amazingly enough, in 22, you would have thought our unemployment claims would have been astronomical, but they were not. But we are forecasting that, again, they're going to come in around that 98. We tried again to be conservative based on the claims incurred so as not to deplete the sources in that fund unnecessarily, but we are proposing for next year a contribution to that fund balance of approximately $303,000. And those are the special revenue funds that we have that will be bringing forth the budget for those to be approved and considered by council.
Thank you, Chief Ford. So what document directs the funding for the hotel motel fund? How would I trace? So you've got, and you show it a little differently, and I'm sure there's good reason, than you do transfers in, transfer out. You show transfers out, but you also show grants and subsidies. So how would I follow the money, so to speak? What is going to debt service? What is going to other projects? What are those other projects? Why is it flat year over year? Yeah.
Thank you, Councilman Carlisle. So I'll just kind of break it down a little bit. The revenues come in as the local taxes, the hotel motel tax, and then we have the 2015 occupancy increase, where we increased that amount in 2015. And then I think it was around 2017, and Deputy Walker might have to correct me, that we instituted the $2 room night fee. So the Visitors and Convention Bureau of the $2 room night assessment fee gets 99% of that, and we get to keep 1% just as kind of the administrative of transferring it out. And then the Memphis Shelby County Sports Authority receives a big piece of the hotel motel tax toward the bond. Is that right, Andre? Toward the bond payment? Yes. Thank you. And then there is the transfer out to debt service, which is about $3.3 million of that money. So it doesn't really stay in.
Right.
In
No, I mean, I'd love to
fund.
just see the flow of funds.
Sure.
If I could see that would be
Absolutely.
great.
We'd be
'Cause
glad
like you
to
said,
do-
there's a lot of moving pieces within that.
In the hotel motel tax, yes, because there were changes. It was 1.7, and then we added another 1.8, and then we added the $2 room night fee. But we can get that for you, absolutely.
And then my second question is, and it's going to come off a little adversarial, but it's not. It's not intended to be. It's a fair question where we've got the Renaissance Convention Center back online, fully operating. We've had a lot of discussions, and I'm going to try and walk around this. Mainly, I'm curious to believe why you think with all the economic development projects that have been proposed and now we're open and operating, with all of the presentations from the administration about all the downhill, rather down years, sorry, why you think will be flat to down, I guess. It's somewhat, I don't want to use the term concerning because that seems, but
On the hotel motel?
yeah, I mean, you're projecting a flat, something that is based on revenue with increases in just general inflation, and the fact that we've, before Chief McGowan left, he talked about how we were back to pre-pandemic levels on convention center, how we've got room nights with Memphis in May back downtown. We've got the sports. We've got the new Liberty Park Regional Sports Complex. I mean, you can't. It's difficult to make the case that we're killing it with all these things open if we're projecting down revenues and taxes, which are a function of people spending money in hotel rooms.
Right, so the FY24 proposed being flat to the FY23, I can share with you that as of the end of April, against a budget of $15,750,000, we have collected $15,051. So we are at 96% of budget. Our collections for the month of April were $1.7 million.
But I guess my point is why are you pessimistic that we're not going to grow? I guess that's I know you're using, I know from your position as more of the CFO does multiple things from treasury to comptroller. This is more budgetary and treasury based hat that you're putting on.
Right.
But from an economic development standpoint, we've stood here with you and told the public all these programs or all this money in the convention center and Liberty Park and all these things are going to drive tourism, and we're flat. So I guess that's my question. Like, how do I go into a room with business leaders and say we need to keep chugging along if we're showing flat?
That's a fair question. So I guess the philosophy behind this whole fund is, again, what goes in goes out. So we could up the revenue to 17 million or whatever we think, based on where we land this year. And again, when we usually do this, we're looking at March, but I also now have the benefit of April's financials, but that we can increase the revenue and it just increases the expenses out. So it's just a flow through fund. But for optics, we can certainly change that amount.
That's why I was asking about the flow funds. The 8.9, I guess, again, just goes back to understanding, to your point, like if we do take in $2 million, it transfers out. It's like and again, my question would be like, where does it end up transferring to if we have an excess of debt service, not near-term liabilities, where do we put that capital? Does it sit in the fund? Does it transfer
It does sit in the fund.
Yeah, okay. That was my other question for you. Okay. All right, I've got thank you, Chief Ford. I've got Councilman Canale and then Chairman Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. The state street aid, where can those funds be spent?
So there are very specific items they can be spent. Thank you. So as those are regulated, obviously, by the state, and the top allocation can be made for mass transit, which we do. It's a kind of an offset to the grant that we make to MATA. So against that $29,170,000, we get to take a percentage of that directly to offset that grant. The other piece of it can be applied to traffic engineering, street signs and markings, traffic signal maintenance, street maintenance, and ground maintenance, specifically related to streets. Yes, it's in Public Works, Robert's Grid. So, yes. So, for instance, last year in revenues from state street aid, we received approximately $20,575,000. Those allowable expenses came up to $34,597,000. So the state street aid doesn't even begin to cover, it leaves about a $14 million gap there in terms of allowable expenses that the state street aid can, on our financial statements, you see it as an expense recovery from state street aid.
But they allow us to decide where it's spent?
No, sir, it's very specific.
In those areas, I mean.
It is everything in those areas. It is, so when we look at the end of the year, we look at everything in Director Berlin's traffic engineering, where he has captured all those expenses. We look at every expense related to that is allowable expense.
Okay.
Yes, they evaluate under state law, under the program, what expenses can be, I'm going to use the term reimbursed, what the allowable expenses are and how they want to book them.
Correct.
If they book $23 million to ground expense and then there's $14 million that Manny could have used, you got to pay for it somehow. So the answer is yes. They have the administration determines what they are going to book against state street aid that is within the program.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we look at every one of those expenses and add them up and go, okay, we had 34, I'm going to round $34.6 million worth of allowable expenses that were directly related to state street aid expenditures, but I only had $20.6 million in revenue against those.
You're going to have, we put Councilwoman Robinson in. You're going to have more expenses probably in almost every single,
Every year.
Yeah, so yeah, there's not like it's robbing Peter to pay Paul if you're trying
Every
to
year.
move.
Every year that since I've been here,
Yeah.
expenses have very much outpaced any allowable revenues for it.
Anything else, Councilman Kennelly? Chairman Jones and then Councilwoman Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Ford, looking back at the hotel motel tax, and you said that we are through April, we're at what level?
96% of budget.
Okay, so 96% of this 15,575. What were, I know you don't have it here, and I left my books in there. Where were we, say, 2019 pre-COVID? Do you recall?
I don't have that. I don't have that with me, but I can tell you that in 2019 pre-COVID, we were probably close to this. And then 20 and 21, our biggest pieces of the revenue replacement was directly related to hotel motel tax.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Then, looking at the 2019 sales tax referendum, looks like we have expenditures of 75.1, but revenues of 73. Are we forecasting revenues to be higher so that they align with what the expenditures are?
Well, and you can see that there's a $4 million there that is a contributed to fund balance.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And so we don't expect to do, okay, and we don't expect to do that this upcoming year.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. There's two pieces to their fund balance. There's an unassigned fund balance, and then which we try not to keep in there, and then there is the reserve fund balance that is set aside for the pension reserve, the healthcare, and the OPEB, and is through FY22 that was sitting at $34 million.
Kelvin, can you hear that? Feel good?
Councilwoman Robinson.
Okay, back to page 3, the State Street Aid.
Yes, ma'am.
So Councilman Ford and I have a lot of streets that belong to the state of Tennessee. Where do we calculate how much money is spent from our budget and how much money is spent? Does the state contribute to those streets?
So the amounts for this particular fund, those are the gas tax revenues that come in. So
Okay. Gas tax. Okay.
hold on, let me tell you where they come from. So you have a gas state motor fuel tax. We have the 3-cent tax, the 1-cent tax, and then the gas improve tax, which is all combines for the revenue. How we determine the expenditures is by what the divisions book as expenditures into the general fund. So anything that the state is doing would have no impact on our operational expenditures.
Okay. So, an example, talk to me about Elvis Presley Boulevard. Who's paying for that?
Ma'am, I can't talk to you about Elvis Presley Boulevard. You need to direct Director Boleen to talk about that.
But that's a part of our budget.
But the expenditures here are based on the general fund expenditures that are occurring in engineering and in public works. That it's a line item specifically related to those specific, like traffic signage and those types of things. Those are very specific. I could ask them to give us a breakdown of what area those expenditures occurred, but that would have to come.
That's not my point. I just want to know if a citizen asks me, if we're getting state street aid, how is it applied? Where is it in the budget? And then when we decide that we need to make some changes in streets that actually are owned by the state, do we use this fund or do we have another fund?
This is specifically related
Just
to
for
those
those?
revenues and those very specific expenditure line items in our budget. Yes, ma'am.
And everything else we're responsible for.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And for repaving, like Poplar, like the section of Poplar they repaved, they did that on their own ticket.
Yeah.
For major infrastructure improvements, which is more than repaving, that's usually a TDOT or a federal block grant coming through TDOT to be administered, in which what Manny's talking about is usually, in particular, and same for John, is there's a local match to those programs depending on which federal program it's coming through, which is why we had to pony up for some of the expense for, I think it was a curb and gutter or?
Yes.
Yeah, it was curb and gutter down Elvis Presley Boulevard, which is also why it takes so long, because it's the state and federal government.
And the reason I asked is, moving forward, how do you explain it? And where the money comes from and who's doing what? And we are responsible for knowing that.
Yes, ma'am. One of the things that's really concerning that's happening, and they think a long way out, but Tasser is in the process right now at the direction of the legislature and the governor, and you've seen it because the governor's proposed, what's he calling them, hospitality lanes, or it's a glorified toll road. It's a glorified toll lane. But ultimately what's happening, and Chief McGowan's also talking about this when you talk about what MLGW looks like in the future as we go towards a more electrified car system and away from diesel and gasoline is how do you continue? This tax pays for 50% of the state's road infrastructure projects. And over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, there is going to be a downward curve to that revenue fund. And we don't have yet a solid replacement or series of replacements to put that funding back in, whether it's a toll lane or it's billing public, when you go plug in your Tesla or whatever electrified vehicle is, how you get taxed for that and how the revenue is collected. And so there are many jurisdictions around the country that fund projects through a very similar mechanism, but eventually it's going to be a huge problem for this state and for the city, much like internet sales tax has been for us. So it'll be very interesting to see what they come out and do, especially when you're pretty much the logistics hub of the state and the region. We're very dependent on that money, and it's going to be interesting. So, colleagues, any other? Chairman Jones.
One last question. I know it's probably coming under the next presentation. The value of the penny, do we have that yet? I was running back in here to make sure I got it.
I feel like Deputy Walker right now. Ask me that. I wasn't ready. Yes, we will get that for you. Thank you, sir. Okay. I apologize. Oh, stop it. I apologize. Thank you.
What was it? Last year was 1.4-ish?
1 point, yes. Last year was 1.4. Yeah. So after the reappraisal, it was about 1.4.
I think is that everything? Mm-hmm. All right.
Oh, wait, do you already have it? For FY24? No, okay, we'll get that for you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I thought, for me, this was very helpful. I have a much better, exactly what Councilwoman Robinson said, I have a much better understanding of the certain flow of funds, much like I always joke with Robert that he's got all the cash. But it's important because Patrice is absolutely right. I get asked very often about why do I pay X on my bill for sewer and what happens to that money and why are there potholes and what is the resurfacing group 5 and all those things. And so it's very helpful. And then, you look at our economic development stuff, and this is where, this is where the city has to make decisions that it does, which is you've got to forecast all of the revenues you think are going to come in. And so I'm very, very helpful for me. I appreciate it. Colleagues, we have got information technology. We've got a break scheduled at now. Do you guys want to take a break or push on through? I see the chairman wants to push on through. Push on through? All right. Let's do this. IT. Director Harris. Taking Memphis into the 21st century. All righty then. Let's do that. I can't believe we're looking on this presentation on paper. I feel like I should add like a digital pad or something. No, I'm just
I
kidding.
wanted it on my glasses.
Oh, yeah, that's all right. Google crushed it with that. Let's hear us whenever you're ready.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us. We are excited to present the FY24 budget for the IT division. I'm Wendy Harris at 150 Peabody Place. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you. So this is our org chart on page 2. Still have 2 legal levels, administration and operations. We have a complement of 80 city employees and 29 contractors. Our strategic priorities. This year, we'll provide the resources to continue to safeguard data and information, build communication networks, enhance the infrastructure, develop and maintain computer systems, and provide practical application for troubleshooting technical devices. We'll also design and support our software applications utilized by our city divisions and the city of Memphis. I added this slide 4, because last year you guys asked us to do some things, and I asked you as well. So I asked for 28 ISLs to convert some of our city positions into contractor positions. That has been really successful. This year, we are still hiring so far. 23 positions have been filled, and we've got 5 candidates either selected or there's a reposting going on. We're also have an effort to bring back our technology service desk in-house. Chris McDonald is heading that up. That's going really well. We've got 6 positions filled, 5 candidates selecting, or either some reposting going on. So we're happy to have them here. This it's given us the opportunity to have them sit with our different departments to learn until we flip the switch in August. Number 3, Councilman Warren, you asked us to allow divisions to put their IT budgets into their own budgets instead of us carrying them. So this is just a snapshot. We moved out 1.5 million spread across the divisions. We still have 10.6 million approximately that we continue to keep in our budget for our critical systems. All right, slide 6. As you can see, year over year, going from 24.5 million to 25 million, with a difference of about 497,000, mainly due to the potential raises that Mayor Strickland has requested, pension, an increase in pension, and an increase in our software renewals. Program comparative spending just shows you the breakdown between our legal levels. There's a 29% increase in the admin legal level, and that's because we did have a large increase in ISLs. And there's a 27% decrease in the operations level, and that's because, again, the increase in ISLs and the decrease in the contractor positions. Next slide, our year-over-year changes in expenditures for personnel services. You'll see the 3.3 million in proposed ISLs. That's the huge decrease because that money has now moved to the full-time salary line. Materials and supplies, we've got a decrease in computer service equipment. Also, if you see miscellaneous professional services, that decrease is attributed to our new city positions, and we're also the 775,000 that you see there. We're no longer recovering M&S, and so that's our net change of 497,000. The 60,000 in revenue we are no longer collecting this year, so that's a decrease of 100%. The next page, page 12, shows the same thing. Our authorized complement, again, we have 80 city positions. We have 15 that are vacant, and I kind of showed a breakdown to give you a realistic view on what's posted and filled. And so if you see down to the left, we have start dates determined for 6 people already. We have 1 candidate selected, 2 being reposted due to termination, 2 to resignation, and then, of course, we have some interviews that don't always go so well, and so we repost again and interview again. So that's the status of those 15. Our major M&S is always, number 1 is our computer software. Then we go on to our professional services at 4.7 million. Those are basically our contractors that we have and some of our highly skilled positions. Outside phone communications at 2.5 million. The next slide shows our professional services. This is a list of the vendors that we work with to supply our contractors. It's 4.7 million. For this fiscal year, FY24. Leases, so we moved, if you haven't heard. So we're saving approximately $34,000. We moved across the street to the Terminex building. And then the last slide reflects our MWBE, total certified and non-certified, puts us at 47.83% as of December the 31st. Yes, sir. ready, Chief Ford? Okay. So, FY24 CIP budget for information technology, first page just shows our 5 projects that are ongoing that we add money to each year. We're asking for a total of $1.2 million for FY24. Our first project, desktop and application infrastructure. This is where every year we fund the programmatic replacement of obsolete equipment to maintain the city's infrastructure. This year we're going to focus on council chambers, replacing the projectors with a video wall, and replacing our obsolete equipment for devices that are past their 3-year warranty. Yes. And as you can see for FY24, there are no dollars assigned to that. We still have money in this budget, so we'll utilize what we currently have. So we're not asking for new dollars for FY24.
I would just like to note that in the history of being the CFO for the city of Memphis, I have never had a division come to me asking me to reduce their CIP budget until this year. So thank you, Miss IT.
You're welcome. There's only so much you can do in a year. And so our next project, cybersecurity infrastructure upgrade, we're only asking for $250,000 this year to go towards 2 initiatives, a third-party risk assessment service, and just to continue our cyber hygiene. Next slide, Chief Ford. Operational infrastructure enhancements, we are asking for $750K here. There's an effort to install new city-owned fiber and also extend our network connectivity at several of our facilities that have low bandwidth. And then implementation modernization, we're asking for $200,000. We spent FY23 assessing all of the applications that are being used across the divisions, and so this is just a continuance of that into FY24. We'll prioritize any upgrades or changes that need to be done and spend that money to go towards that. And the last one is Treasury tax system. There are no dollars being asked for FY24. And that is it.
All right, Chairman Jones.
Finally, Treasury tax system. Finally. Director Harris, I'm looking at, well, can you provide some commentary? I know that we've gone from a contractor standpoint to an employee standpoint, but I'm looking at page 18 for professional services. Can you remind me where we may have been with that number? Because we've brought a lot of the professionals in-house, that number's gone down, right?
It's decreased by 2.1 million.
Okay.
With this change.
But now, over just since last year?
Just this fiscal year with changing those 28, 29 positions to contractor, it changed 2.1 million.
But our overall savings probably, now that's just going from 23 to 24. Our overall savings of over past 3 or 4 years has been even greater than that, has it not?
For contractor spend?
Yes. The fact that we have more employees versus contractors.
I would say the opposite. We've had more contractors in the past than we've had city employees.
So what I'm saying, so when we have more contractors.
He's saying what's more expensive, contractors or city employees?
Well, no. I know which one is more expensive, but I'm just saying, at this 4.7, at one point, were we at 8? You said we've come down from 6 to 7?
I would say so, yes.
Gotcha.
Yes, so we have been decreasing over the years.
Okay. And then going to your CIP, this IT 01001, wouldn't that be like hardware, computers, desktops, what have you? How much do we have left over that we can have zero for this year?
We have $593,000 currently. in the budget. And so what, there is an older CIP project, 1083, that's also for desktop and application infrastructure that we've spent. We're trying to deplete that as well so we can close that old account. So right now we have 593 available in this bucket.
For a city that's, well, employees that's so big.
Well, so we do obsolete replacement every year.
Okay.
Okay, so every piece of equipment doesn't need to be replaced every year.
Right.
And so for this year, the focus, actually, we're somewhat caught up on our older devices. So now we're moving to a model of once the 3-year warranty runs out and we no longer have support, we'll start replacing those. So this year, those are the ones that we're focusing on outside of the council chambers, replacing of the audio visual.
Okay, thank you.
So that's so I'm going to piggyback off that. So you were saying you're changing I was curious to know what that policy was. Yeah. And I know, look, everybody does everything different. Some people lease copiers, some people buy them, some people appreciate them. Like you guys can't take depreciation, so I'm curious. So generally speaking, let's just use laptops as an example, right? So our policy on those laptops is what?
In the past, it's been 5 years or older.
Okay, and then it's just rolling that cycle.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. And that's very helpful. Looking forward to the chamber getting some new stuff.
Look, I got on
maybe some new paneling.
I was on the Alcohol Commission in 2003, and a lot of that equipment. Well, I think the monitor may have changed, the big projector may have changed, but going back to the chairs that we talked about, those chairs were there when I got on there in 2003.
If you could put a switch up by the chairman's seat to turn up and down the volume of the speakers as we got guests coming to the microphone, that'd be solid too. Some people get to yelling pretty quick. All right, colleagues, any other questions? We are here tomorrow for City Council Day and then back for budget hearings 3:30 Wednesday the 17th.